Now I'm lost in love and I don't know much. I'm thinking about your velvet touch. I'm confusing your computing for all and Susan. I'm gonna find you and make you happy. Follow what your body says. We must use psychiatry to evolve, and we must create an epistemology together. That makes us smarter.
The parts where parts of your body would disappear and you would just see the image that was projected behind it. And I saw that the videos were from varying times. It seemed like there was one that you could hear, but then one in the background that seemed maybe from sometime in the past. And I wasn't sure of the time frames and like how you correlated those images.
Well, a lot of those videos were made like 13 years ago when I did like a video a day, which was challenging. And obviously I set that up. Like I was like, I want to be challenged.
Right.
I want to see what would happen if I have like only a day to prepare. And I also, you know, want to kind of, YouTube was like this place to broadcast the self. And I thought, well, let me play around with like, I don't know. I mean, I'm broadcasting neurosis.
Right. You were like an early adopter too. I mean, that's like when YouTube was fresh, you know, it's like when it still was like a place where you could discover anything, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah, kind of, I mean, I missed the influencer boat, but I was also like, bye.
Right.
Because that was never really my intention. And there are a lot of really interesting artists that have played around with subverting, you know, becoming someone different and then subverting a community.
Yeah.
And I've never been really like that interested in actually really pulling the wool over anyone's eyes. I'm actually way more interested in like, let me expose what's behind that. And so I'm so interested in that. So to answer your question about like, how did we decide the videos? I like to work with the I Ching. So I like chance. And a lot of the longer videos that I have on my, you know, after I did all those like, you know, 350 videos on YouTube for Pink Anxiety. That was my year-long residency. That's what I called it. Then I did longer works, but I didn't want to go into like video editing mastery. I was actually really interested in doing blind edits. So I did a lot of blind edits where you're just kind of like on iMovie where you're just like, I'm just gonna put this here and this here and this here.
Sort of let the machine do its job, do the work for you in a little bit.
Yeah, and that's what a painter does.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's like, well, let me see what's going to happen. Let me put something over here to see what that looks like. Oh, wait, I don't like that. Let me pull that away, or let me add something else to that. So thinking of video making as painting and not being fussy about, I don't know, video art.
Yeah, looking at it as layers almost rather than cuts or edits. Because I always find that like art is, you know, like a big thing of what actually art is like creating boundaries for yourself. Or like creating a system from which to work from.
Yeah.
You know, and that's where like the real experimentation comes in when you've given yourself constraints that might be random. You know, because you said you love chance, and I love that pursuit too, where, you know, the artistry isn't agonizing over these details, you know.
Yeah, that's actually really important to me, because the artists that agonize over the details, like you said, they miss the joy of creating. They
Mm-hmm.
miss the like why all of us creatives are drawn to this path is that there are these sparks, that there's this invention that happens, that there's spontaneity, you know, that like something combusts in studio, like scientific experiments, something bubbles over, something spills, and that makes the painting or that makes the sculpture. And to get into this, for that to happen, you've got to be committed to your studio practice. That means it can't be such a job that you've drained all the excitement from it. Yeah. So, I mean, that's also like really, that's why I call myself a biodynamic artist. Mm. And actually, you know, I didn't really understand that's what I was. It was more, I was just doing my thing. And then you, like you said, like creating a structure or a constraint, but having fun with that. Like, obviously a circus is in a ring for a reason, like the circle around all these events, and like the clown and the tightrope walker, and all of it's just like, it's totally orchestrated to look like it's just chaos, but it's rehearsed. So there's a certain amount of like, well, even to, you know, you've got to rehearse to get that chaos, but you've also got to have chaos before you rehearse. I don't know if I answered that. What I meant is that you got to have a certain amount of chaos.
I love that. I love it. Because creation comes from the abyss, right? You almost like, you need an abyss to produce that, to find that creation, I think, you know.
I think so too. I think so. And if you know, and I would say, you know, if the abyss isn't outside, the abyss is within. And, you know, the parts of my practice that are really self-reflexive, that where I really see the art making as essential as like, oh, making the bed and eating healthy and getting enough sleep. Like, the art making is really intrinsic to like my daily life. And, which means that I really see its value. You know, I think of it as like, wow, you know, you want to be healthy, you've got to like enjoy your creative process. Then you can't be like, oh, I got to paint those damn paintings. Yeah. You've got to be like, wow, I can't wait to see what happens when these two materials interact.
I saw a couple like repeating like phrases and concepts, like the inner child, mirror, but also like this sort of ineffable, untouchable thing that cannot be taught. Like in the part that was almost like a monologue, right? It had more of a like philosophical bent than some of the other parts. The core, or I would say explicitly, because you know it's impossible to surmise what exactly is your philosophical intention in every moment of the artwork, but it really touched upon sort of this thing that you cannot learn in an art school. This thing that comes from art that is embodied, that you know, something that a scientist would not like to admit, right? And it seemed throughout that this was something that you were trying to express. Do you see that it's almost as like an impossibility to actually express it in art and create its own sort of arbitrary boundary that you're always trying to grasp at this thing that's
Yeah.
impossible to say?
Yeah. Yeah, that resonates. There's a kind of, I'm very interested in like poetics at the same time as like, I was just saying chaos theory. And then I'm like, yeah, I do think of myself as a total scientist. But the poetry of my work, I think, is in all of these like connections that I'm always wanting to make with things. Not really like not the driving mechanism, because I feel like it's just, I think, like, I guess what I'm trying to say is that, like, if it's a poem that I'm making, like, I'm not writing it. Because that's maybe what I'm trying to say.
It's like the Dada approach, right? It's like you can make poetry by cutting up the newspaper, mixing it up in a bag, and choosing it at random. The poetry will create itself, and it's like, I think what you mean about the relational aspect of that, it's like, it's about embracing those relationships. Even if it doesn't make sense at first, there's still a relationship there that can be fostered and explored and enjoyed. And like, that's the surprise of life. We don't get to choose who we get to meet necessarily,
Right.
Yeah, right?
Well,
surprise.
You said 13 years ago you were doing these videos per day, right? And you're standing in front of a camera.
Yeah.
This contemporary work is highly layered in you suturing together various media. There's synth, there's video, there's obviously this heavy presence of costuming, of performance, of character, right? Was this something that you felt present always, or is it just something that's elaborated over time?
I think that it also just kind of like answer to like this synesthetic way that I experience the world, and that I am actually synesthetic, which we all are. When we're about 2, we start to unlearn our synesthesia. So most creatives like tap into synesthesia, where you like, you see things when you hear music. And like a roundabout way to look at everything is really to be like just being in the world, and what are the sensations through all the senses. There is like that, sure, the childlike wonder of being in the world, playing dress up for sure, and drag in my work. But, like behind me, this is from a film I'm working on, Hereaclitus. Some of the personas aren't personas to dress up and play with identity. They're this creature that's about dissolving in a landscape, to become other, to become something, not just the entertainer, not just the artist, and not just, the poet or the dancer, but a spiritual experience of reality. There you go. There it is. The metaphysics.
Well, the first contact that immediately came to mind was performance artist Linda Montano, who came to Defibrillator. I'm taking over the screen for a second, but like, she did like this project called 7 Years of Living Art, and each year in the cycle she would wear clothing of the same color and like be in a room of that color for like 5 hours, and so she moved through the 7 colors of the 7 various chakras, and the chakras are the energy bodies, the energy centers of the body, and they're all aligned like with the spine, with like different like organs and stuff, along the spine. And I'm gonna stop sharing for a second.
That's
And
beautiful.
yeah,
That's
no, and specifically, the yellow chakra is it's the third chakra. It's like right at your solar plexus, which is also like such an important organ. I think also isn't solar plexus like a really big one for Deleuze? I mean, I know y'all are like philosophy, but yes, exactly. It's power, it's control, as you said.
Power.
Titus.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's all
identity,
about
pride.
power. It's all
Yeah,
about confidence. Actually, confidence
yeah,
is the name of the
confidence.
game. And of course, like the chakras, it's something that you want to keep open and balanced. And if there's a blockage, like if you're sick or something else, like you will have like emotional or physical like symptoms. And like psychoactively, I think even just like
So
thinking about like what does it mean to have too much confidence, or what does it mean to be like underconfident or like nervous or worried, and how are these like manifestations of like a lack of balance in like that solar plexus, like yellow chakra. And I think that's like definitely something that's like coming up like in just like like this conversation about like the threshold of like balancing all those
definitely.
things. So that was just one of the contexts that like I found and wanted to bring in. Yellow is just such a complicated and fascinating color to like play with and have as like a
Yeah,
monochrome,
yeah,
and like is like a color that like is sometimes like associated with like miasma or like disease, like the yellow
yeah,
wallpaper,
Yeah.
or like others
totally,
like mm-hmm.
totally. And
Not so much.
and I'm so glad you brought up Linda Montano because I feel like she's like my art heroine for sure. I met her when she was in her first white year, crown chakra. I actually met her through my video teacher at the Kansas City Art Institute, who brought a group of us up. Hey, I brought a group of us up to Lawrence, Kansas, I think is where Linda Montano was doing a meditation performance workshop. I did not know what I was getting myself into. It was probably the most formidable experience in art that I had, and
What
I
year was that
honestly,
here?
this was 1987. So
So very formative.
very formative, and
Yeah.
she had us all laying on the ground, and we had to touch 3 different bodies of other people and create like a chain on the ground of a circle of bodies. And if we felt uncomfortable, we had to like try and make contact with more people, like she's really pushing, talk about the threshold. And she also said, we had to do meditation and vocal work and breath work. And, she kind of like guided you through like, first you're going to sound ridiculous. Then you're going to get past the embarrassment because then you're going to feel great because you went and you got it out. So, wow, she's a healer. And I made a sound like a boat motor as my like inner noise, which I remember getting past that point where I was embarrassed. And then it was like a rhythm and a motor of expression that came over me where I wasn't worried at all how I sounded or what I looked like. And so I got to meet her, and then later I got to be in one of her performances and just geek out all around because that's my hero. But I also felt like not everyone in art school was like a Linda Montano, the way I was. And I was like literally living my life like in a painting. I was like wearing my paintings as hats, became these like sculptural hats. And that's kind of how I started out. I didn't start out with the concept of what I wanted to do. I just started wearing my paintings around, and people are like, you should videotape that. And I'd be like, oh, okay. You know, it's like, are you going to perform? Yeah, I am. You know, are you going to sing? Are you going to dance? Sure. But it was never like part of like what I wanted to do. It was just that I stepped into the painting. The painting led me. That's the blur. That's the blur of art life. And the spiritual part too. And Linda Montano has been like a guiding force, you know, throughout my work, because as an artist, she just grew and evolved. And then, you know, I got to just be a fan person majorly, and still am you know, not just her practice, which is like that philosophy, but it's also that a really clever trickster will put you in a situation with some tools and coax you there. And then you're like, wow, this is therapy. Or wow, this person just got me to start talking about my dad in public with other people. And now we're talking about grief together. And so she's so clever and yet committed to what she does, that she goes way past a performance, way past what a happening is. She's doing really deep spiritual work. And there's that blurring of art and life again.
It's the transcendent.
It is the transcendent. Yeah. And so I guess I also forgot to say that I really wanted to tell everyone the story of why yellow, because a lot of funny things happened. When I got COVID, one of the things happened is my liver wasn't working well, and I got those weird COVID toes, and I looked at the bottom of my feet when I was in such a high fever, days on end, just laying there. And my feet had a yellow callus that wrapped around, you know, not just like detoxing, but like a yellow callus, and it wrapped around my toes. And I thought, am I going to die? Like, this is like the beginning. You're like kind of grayish blue, you know, you're so bloated, you're not eating, you're just in a hospital room in your living room. And I just thought I was like making peace with my life. I was making peace with, is this my time? And I started to think of other experiences with yellow. And I remembered my drag mom. And my drag mom was an artist, David Gilmore, that went to the Kansas City Art Institute, who was a fiber artist who worked in performance and also in sculpture. Now here's an artist that I totally apprenticed with, because he was a queer artist who was meticulous about craft, constantly challenging materials, you know, hand dyeing silk to stretch over wood sculptures, to make the music and the video, to perform in them, to have these outside, you know, like that's the person who inspired me. And David would do drag, and he did abject drag, you know, where he'd like stuff his belly with pillows and his buttocks with pillows and just be like, you know, out. When we were surrounded by all these queens and this incredible queer scene in Kansas City in the late 80s. And I was just a child watching that going, wow. Like, so that was my drag mother, and they ended up going to Yale in sculpture. So who decided to follow in their footsteps like a good little ducky? I totally did. And David became sick with AIDS pretty early on. And, you know, he, you know, it was like he didn't get to finish his time at Yale. He didn't get to go on to have all these solo shows. He was just this phenomenal queer artist, along with hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of thousands of creatives that we lost to AIDS. And his lover, Ashton, who I was close with, told me that when David was getting ready to pass, he started to get jaundice all over his body. And he said, I'm going to own it. And, you know, made super tall platform shoes, painted him yellow, dyed his hair yellow, wore yellow makeup, wore the yellow turtleneck and the yellow 3-piece suit, and just went right in. And I was like, oh, wow, that's what I have to do to not only memorialize my intense experience with COVID, but to memorialize like these, like this queer inheritance that I hold the stories of. You know, I didn't realize how important it is that we do the work we're meant to do and express ourselves even in the most eccentric way, or play with the threshold, because we're actually telling a story that not everyone's heard yet. So their stories live in my stories. And I was like, had to tell that story of, you know, my drag mother isn't with us, but, you know, I carry that flag of being like, that's the artist that inspired me in art school. And that's why, one of the reasons why yellow.
Follow it around, back around. Okay. Okay, what do we feel like? What do we feel like? Are we feeling angry? Are we angry? Anger. Out. Anger. Out. Bring it in anger. Bring it out. Bring it in. Bring it out. Bring it in. Bring it out.
And you know, it's funny because our stories seem so familiar to us, but you know, to everyone else, our stories are always a mystery, right? You know, and so there's this weird process of needing to tell stories over and over again because, you know, and sometimes you're really close to a person and it's like, yeah, Dad, I've heard that story a million times, Dad. But there's an importance to that because it is the first time for somebody, and especially in art making, for a lot of us, it's the first time hearing that story, and there are certain stories that deserve to be retold over and over again. And
that I was somewhat curious about, which was, you know, when did virality become like an explicit concern in this larger work? I mean, were you already thinking about it when you were sick? Or was it something that only afterward that you realized was a part of these works? That's something that pulled some of the aspects of the works together.
Like viralness of the work, like.
Well, I mean, you even in one of them talk about, you know, the virus explicitly. That seems like something that's very, very conscious. But you also seem to recognize quite quickly the like relation of yellow to sickness, despite having done yellow work prior. So was it a mix of the two, of like consciously trying to produce something that was going to talk about this experience, but at the same time then drawing on what you had done in the past and seeing these kind of tendrils that had reached out into things that you had done before?
I like the idea of the tendrils because I do think that when my work is around me, it is like where you're taking a walk in nature and the branches like tickle your ear and you're like, oh wow, you're right, there's a tree there. And I do feel like the yellow work did represent a deep depression I had, and it was it calmed me down to do all that yellow work. And I thought a lot of the yellow work I did was really scary. And it was hard to look at. It's even hard to look at now because I could see my suffering. And, you know, that was all neurochemistry, and that was then. And I sort of put everything in a big bin, and I didn't have, and I wasn't, so like composting, I was composting. That's what I mean to say, right? Like I just let the natural process happen. And it was like surviving COVID gave me this sense of like, oh my God, I'm alive and I survived. And that I could go and look at work that was hard to look at and reinvigorate it and just throw it up in the air and have it literally land and be like, wonderful, perfect, planned that all along. What's next? What do we create now? And my dreams then, you know, whatever I had, you know, I had been working on other work. And when I got COVID, I couldn't do anything. And rather than hang on to the frustration, it was really just about, I just want to live. And then when it was about all of the breath work and the daily meditation, and I just got way more spiritual than I already was, then I started being like, okay, I want to live, but just tell me what to do, you know, like guide my work, like I was praying, basically praying, and literally was told to tell my story.
It's, you know, I mean, that's the like artist's joy. It's like trying to share the joy of creation, you know, because you were talking about how, you know, typically you go to a gallery, it's like this work has been chosen to be shown, that there's been a privileging process, you kind of called it. And the actual magic though of creation is, you know, it's like you write 10 poems and you're ready to quit because you hate them all. And then, you know, and then you turn over a napkin, you know, between going to the bathroom and going back to work, right. Write down 10 lines and it changes your life.
Changes your life.
But part of that though is the like 10 trash poems you just wrote, you know, and that's what makes the illumination happen, you know?
Yeah, the illumination. Yeah, because if you edit yourself too much, you don't turn on the faucet to really let the stuff out, like to really get the words on the paper. And I've done that before where I just lit a candle and said, okay, let's just channel, let's just write everything that comes. And, you know, out of the stuff is something interesting, but you've got to kind of go through the stuff. I also find that sometimes with paintings, I'm just pushing paint around and I'm looking at the painting going, fuck, oh wait, this is my thing. I guess I can swear in it. Excuse my French. Darn it, oh my stars. But like you look at your painting, you go, I don't like that. Why don't I like that? Why don't I like that little moment? What is it about that little moment? Then there's other times where you push the paint around and you find something like, oh my God, what is that? I totally see a whole series in just that. And so you don't know where you're going to be at any corner in your painting, pushing, pull. You could be like, wow, I don't like the way that looks, or wow, I love the way that looks. And so spending time painting is where the joy comes for me. So spending time playing with materials rather than go, oh wow, this is chroma key, I have to really calm down, think about the seamlessness of what I can do when I change this background. Whereas I'm much more interested in, you know, how that becomes my hand. I'm in my painting and I'm holding on to a branch, you know. I'm more interested in like what happens when you play with that. And so was Jun Paik, because Jun Paik decided to do this amazing video piece out of all of them, you know. I'm thinking of the one where he had Merce Cunningham come and dance behind the backdrops of what he's created, but he was really interested in taking this other artist and putting them in these other histories. And I thought, well, I could just put myself in my old work and then not only have all this work competing for space and attention, But rather than look at this work and say, oh, that's my neurotic work, that was my over obsessive work, or that was like art therapy work, experimentation work, I go, who cares? Throw it in. Let's see what happens, you know? And that's what that residency allowed me to do. But I'm glad that I approached it that way. There it is. There's my friend. Right? And so, oh, yes, exactly. And I mean, I'm just learning from Jun Paik, you know, how to, you know, he took apart the televisions. And you know, you were talking about like how, you were talking about writing, and I remember there was this writer that said, you know, the work you do on one poem affects all the other poems you are to write. So you could labor over a poem for like 6 months or 6 years. And then as soon as it turns, yes, as soon as it turns, all the other poems are written in one night. Or like that one composer who just did 32 symphonies in one night. And I love that kind of title creation, because it's just kind of like you're doodling, and then before you know it, all the paintings have already painted themselves. You just literally held your hand and they just all got painted. And I do love the quantity over quality, as just because of the energy of that. And I am different than obviously a conceptual minimalist artist, although they could be just as influenced by Dada and Fluxism as me. I just tend to be over in the maximalist. What else can I put on? What else can I paint? Can I paint this? I did feel that there was this kind of, my work has been described as relentless to some folks. And there was this kind of like relentless experimentation, which I would have thought, no, I'm political. And I'm like, wow, that's this capitalism that exhausts my relaxed production, because I'm like, nope, gotta keep creating, keep making more. Even though, excuse me, to critique capital, but becoming a machine yourself. And then it's like, okay, well, there's schizophrenia right there. And I'm like, oh, how do I reverse this? I have to reverse this. You know, it's like I'm reading philosophy, not so that I can just fall into the same abyss. I actually want to find a way to work through that and not get lost in that collapse myself. And so even though now I'm able to look at hyper productivity I had before with this gaze of like, well, wait a minute, this is interesting. Okay. But what happens if you just go take a walk in the woods? Like, you know, and put the camera on the end of the stick. Like, what happens when you're not this hyper productive artist? And maybe let's let that work breathe a little, because I'm not going to be very political if I'm just driving myself so hard to create. But of course, I didn't realize that until, you know, I really struggled with that and said, I've got to think more about what my body and heart need. This isn't just about my mind creating. And that's going back to that more somatic experience of creating in the studio, where you're like, oh, this is good, but it's time to go to bed. And in the past, I've been like, let's just stay up all night and paint that out. It's like, no, let's go to bed. Because in the morning, you're able to like fall in love with that paint again. But you can go to bed. The painting does not need to be done. Because that's like all those artists that exhausted themselves and died penniless and mentally ill. And I'm like, can we not do that? I don't want to do that one.
Yeah.
Tell the story differently. And that's like, artists can be smart, but let's not feel that they have to like read every book and exhaust the criticality of their work. They also should just play a little in the studio. That's when the smart art comes, when you're not trying so hard to make it so smart. And I also think the expressive work comes when you're not trying so hard to express yourself. You're just being the self and letting the materials, you know, move through you rather than like your ideas. I'm not really interested so much in my ideas as much as I'm interested in the world. And obviously I'm going to filter it through my experience of being in the world. But the world's my muse. That's everything. I just am excited that we got to have a talk. I'd rather than be like, I did this piece and I was doing working this. That's not interesting to me. I'd rather have a conversation about a work. I'm so interested in what art can do in the world. So I wouldn't want to just be like, well, look at what I've done. It's more interesting to have a conversation and have that work kind of be a part of the threads, or not. I guess it's like, yeah, like the threads, but we're the beans that are being woven. It's our experiences that are woven, you know?
Well, right. And your art is so about, you know, removing the form, right? It's formless. And you know, that's how I think we're able to move forward, because, you know, and sometimes it's nice to keep things contained in a petri dish, right? Because it makes it more intelligible, it makes it more understandable. But, you know, our life doesn't happen inside a petri dish.
No.
And this is the fun thing about all this, is that, you know, it doesn't have to follow a formula, you know, it's expansive.
Right? Formula isn't really interesting anyway.
Yeah, unless it's an unsolved formula, and then it becomes incredibly interesting, right? You know, and so it's all about exploration, and because you never know it's what you're going to get. It reintroduces that element of chance again, you know.
Yeah, and I'm so interested in chance. I mean, like Hugo Ball and the Cabaret Voltaire, like all those artists, they didn't say, oh, well, I don't have acting training, so I can't do that. They were like, I'm going to make up a poem. I'm going to make wings out of cardboard. I'm just going to speak in weird tongues and see what kind of performative stuff comes through me, which can be really challenging, actually. It can be really challenging. Oh, there it is. Let's read that poem. Oh, yes. Who wants to read it?
I've not always had this certainty, this pessimism which reassures the best among us. There was a time when my friends laughed at me. I was not the master of my words. A certain indifference. I have always known well what I wanted to say, but most often it was because I had nothing to say. The necessity of speaking and the desire not to be heard, my life hanging only by a thread. There was a time when I seemed to understand nothing. My chains floated on the water. All my desires are born of my dreams, and I have proven my love with words. To what fantastic creatures have I entrusted myself? In what dolorous and ravishing world has my imagination enclosed me? I am sure of having been loved in the most mysterious of domains, my own. The language of my love does not belong to human language. My human body does not touch the flesh of my love. My amorous imagination has always been constant and high enough so that nothing could attempt to convince me of error.
Oh, I know, right? And Noah's like, fantastic creatures. I know, you're like, Jack Smith, one of my favorite artists, and seminal art that inspired me was Fantastic Creatures. And yeah, this Paul Eluard poem, I mean, he's really talking about this incredible like balance that you achieve in your life, where you just, you love yourself, you accept yourself, you're clear on what you want, you have some clarity, you have a relationship to your art form that's really committed and internal and magical and never goes away, you know, and you have some kind of like incessant need to say that to everyone, to express that in everything at the same time, keep it absolutely sacred, not an utterance, or almost like too much to say, too much love to share, that you're like, yeah, it's an amazing spiritual creativity. And then to, you know, in the poem, being able to reflect and say, I haven't always been this clear, you know, I have a story to tell now and I'm telling this story, but I haven't always been so clear.